valves were open, and the county and Medina County was able to get water from Cuyahoga County. Medina City is then able to get water from Medina County, and so that transaction started to happen as well. But there ended up being a pressure problem, and I live in the city of Medina. So in essence, what they did was they opened a fire hydrant, and they put a pumper truck between that fire hydrant and another fire hydrant, and what the pumper truck does is it increases the pressure. It pumps it right back into another hydrant, and then that allows for the water pressure that the city of Medina needed. But when you introduce that pumper truck, you automatically create the need for a boil alert. So that's why the city of Medina had the boil alert that it had for a period of time, maybe about 36 hours, maybe longer than that. So from my perspective, and the concern is anything that was inside the tank of that truck, could potentially be in the water line, and as you're flushing water through there, that's the concern, bacteria, whatever it is. I don't know how long it takes that water to flush that stuff out. I'm the guy that picks stuff off the ground. It's not a 5-second rule for me, it's a 5-minute rule for me. I'm not so much concerned about that, I'll be completely honest. I didn't boil any of my water. I just figure out my immune system's probably stronger because whatever was in that water now, I've learned to fight. But the city and the county and everybody, to Jeff's point, worked very, very well together in order to keep things moving and going in the right direction. And one of the benefits of this job is anytime something like this comes up, I learn more about cats this year, oil and gas, and how the water system works. It's kind of a new part of the job. But yeah, the city and the county did a very, very nice job. I know Nino was up a lot of the night. The local emergency planning, Jim Bigham, who does stuff at Medina Hospital, he was up a large portion of the night making sure the hospital folks were taken care of. But it was well run, well done. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a clarification. That I had the judge done about hell freezing over.
Yeah.
Avon Lake freezing over did not count.
Okay.
Still waiting for hell, so the judge still wins.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned heroin, major expenses in town. I want to commend you because I'm a member of the Medina County Drug Abuse Commission. I was in the city of Brunswick. Adam has been involved in our board as our county representative. He comes to all of our meetings. They're very insightful. All of us on the board realize that there is a problem. I've been a member of that board for over 20 years. And it's getting worse. It's not getting better. It switches from marijuana to crack. Now it's heroin. And there's a huge epidemic in Vermont. I mean, it's a never-ending battle. Everybody has to be alert to drugs.
Just for those of you who couldn't hear, Cliff and I sit on the Medina County Drug Abuse Commission board together. We basically meet just about every month, just give every month of the summer, month in January. And the county has a drug levy, and basically those monies are spent to educate, to prevent, to fight
Treatment.
Treatment. There's also a drug task force. I mean, those monies are spent to fight drugs in Medina County.
It's $1.6 million.
And again, that's one.
That's your tax dollar.
That's one piece of the Medina County budget. Again, you talk to the sheriff, you talk to Job and Family Services, adult probation, some of the housing folks. It is amazing. I think somebody said heroin's a very, very cheap drug, from what I understand right now. So, and very, very available. It's unfortunate. Yes, sir.
Yes, I have a question about who appoints for real estate appraisers? Are they county employees or are they outside companies?
The real estate appraisers, each county auditor decides whether or not they are going to do the appraisals with folks they hire and their own staff, or if they're going to contract that out. And there's two schools of thought. One is if you do it in-house, it's definitely done cheaper. If you contract it out, you're potentially using folks with a higher level of expertise, and you're using folks that are more independent. From what I understand, Medina County is one of only about 6 counties in the state that do appraisals from within. We use our in-house staff that work for the county audit. And I think if you look at his numbers, that keeps those costs very, very low.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Well, if there's nothing else.
When there is a need for the county trucks to plow snow, and they make the first pass down the road and the salt spreader's running, why is it running on the first pass when they come back on the second pass, plow all that salt into the ditch, and put another layer down? Why does that happen?
I can ask Mike Slay that. I don't see if you ever had that question before. I can ask Mike Slay. I know if your mailbox is too close to the road and the snowplow guys,
I've suffered.
that's the next topic du jour is mailbox. But I can ask Mike Slay if there's a process they're supposed to be following. It's a good question. Mr. Smith.
Back to the deer issue.
I have to assume, as you said, that you are in support of the roadkill bill.
You know what? I heard about the roadkill bill. I'm not familiar with it though. What are the?
Maybe the senator could explain it.
The House bill.
I will say this, a couple of years ago, I was driving down Smith Road, and I saw a truck hit a pheasant. It was one of these beautiful pheasants. It must have been one that somebody had released for a hunt and just not gotten killed. And I stopped and I called the police department and said, am I allowed to take that home? And they thought that was the dumbest question. Why are you calling us? I said, it's a pheasant that had just got run over, everything else was good, so we had roadkill pheasant for dinner.
The best way to recycle.
It's that exactly. Why let it go to waste? Yes, sir.
My question, going back to the cat issue. I hate to dress this up, but I am not a cat, I am a dog. But anyway, has it been considered that, you mentioned that the finances to take care of the cats is coming from the dog licenses, which are not cheap. Has it been considered, and this would solve several problems, a cat license?
It was not considered just because, it's another charge. At this point where the SPCA is now taking care of it, the SPCA, the county, does the county do some money for SPCA? And there's some. Yeah.
Yeah, when statutes, the reason nobody does cat licenses because the House and Senate has never given authorization to counties to do that. And, as they just have to go bash shelter. Any legislator that has ever proposed that ended up losing the re-election. So, given the emotion, you can see why. Secondly, the statutes provide that if we have excess money at the end of the year in the dog and kennel fund, which comes from the licenses, we can give for services rendered an appropriation to the Humane Society at the end of the year, just once. And it's for services such as if we get an injured animal, they'll assist us. And in this case, we can also use it for cats, but only once a year, given for specific purposes. So that's really not a mechanism. And frankly, I'm being a dog owner and so forth, kind of offended that I would have to pay a license in order to provide for the care of the cat. So, I mean,
To kill songbirds.
yeah, exactly. So I think that's the way the statute is written, and until such time that the state legislature addresses the issue, it's kind of a gray area. And most counties, that's why, what is it, 90% of the counties don't get involved with cats.
The other thing too I've learned about cats is the cats and feral cats, and I don't know that I ever understood what feral cat meant, but a feral cat from a personality and a demeanor standpoint, it's like closer to like a possum or some other sort of wild animal as opposed to a domestic or a house-friendly pet. And the folks at the animal shelter were having to make that determination at times too. And there's folks that just don't, every cat is sacred type of thing. It was difficult. And again, I give Steve kudos for taking most of the bullets.
Well, Adam, I have a question, and it's probably more of a question for everyone out here. I've been watching for the last year and a half or so, some of our people religiously going to these NOACA meetings, etc. And my understanding is what they were concerned about was the threat that that organization could be turned to enacting Agenda 21 from the United Nations. Well, my plate is full. I've never really had the time to study Agenda 21 and its implications. But I was just wondering if there was somebody here that understands what that's all about, Agenda 21, how it relates to NOACA, and after all this time, maybe Steve could do it. But I was wondering if somebody could share that, you know, here's the concerns, and here's what we're watching for, etc., so that Adam wouldn't be blindsided in his new role there.
I'll tell you what, I'll give the short answer, and then I'll let Steve embellish on what I say. I think NOACA is, the Agenda 21 concerns that might be related to NOACA are more related to what was called the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium. And anytime you hear the word sustainable, there's concerns. And I think the things that pertain to Agenda 21, from how I see them, is anytime the government creates regulations or changes or whatever, in order to say you need to live here and you can't live here, you need to do business here, you can't do business here, that's when I have a concern. And one of the things that came up through the Sustainable Communities Consortium, and if I butcher it, Steve, again, correctly, was there was going to be certain tax breaks, certain tax abatements, certain grants that were available, but they were only going to be available if you used this box for where you were going to do your business or where you're going to build your home or where you were going to conduct operations. And again, Steve, to his credit, Bethany Dentner was there as well. They said, listen, that's just not fair. There's no reason to create these tax breaks and these changes for just this area. If we're going to do it, we need to do it throughout the entire area. And to me, that seemed to be something, and I'm sure the folks who were trying to make these changes had no idea that they were falling into Agenda 21 type changes. But they recognized that those were not something we wanted to abide by, and said, no, we're not going to agree to that. So if there's anything else, I know you talked a few weeks ago when you were here, and you had some of those questions.
Yeah, if you want to come up there.
Yeah, I know, there's a lot, actually, done a lot of research over the last several years on Agenda 21, and Agenda 21 is very real. It's an imposition of certain policies, and basically, fundamentally, changing our way of life in terms of freedoms and markets and so forth, as well as you go down the checklist, it's matters of enforcing people to live in high-density areas, as well as forcing us to abandon our cars and go down the list. And frankly, it's antithetical to the American way of life. There's no doubt about it. And the fear is that because of the nature of the Obama administration, that they were going to impose it through a series of grants. And I think the fear was that with the HUD grant that was achieved through the Sustainable Communities Consortium, that they would go through a process where this Agenda 21 was imposed from the top. Well, we found in the experience, and those of you who know I was involved and mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, that certainly early on, but the idea was to bring these people together and plan from the bottom up. The recommendations that have now come forward for public discussion and comments, and they're going to be coming, there are recommendations that involve trying to do things differently. But I say it's actually the ways, even us good Republicans and those of us concerned about these issues are saying, yeah, these are changes we need to make in terms of encouraging cooperation between local governments, things at the state. Actually, when you start talking about the local policies that we've already started to do in this county, we have areas of where it's called a balanced growth initiative, and working with local property owners and with local zoning, with local government, and saying, where do you want to incentivize? Do you want to encourage people to build in floodplains? where then the federal government, the state government have to pay for the replacement of their homes several times over? No, you don't encourage them. They can, they have the right to. But sorry, we're not going to replace your home if you're dumb enough to go into a flood area. Those are the kind of things that make some sense. And also, where do you want to, with the tax dollars we have, where do you want to prioritize economic development where you've got sewers, where you have the investment? And so the recommendations are coming out, actually, I think most people can support. Now, given the nature and diversity of politics here in Northeast Ohio, there's going to be recommendations that more specifically, that there are a lot of people aren't going to agree with. Nobody agrees with everything that's coming out of this thing. But I think most people agree with most of the things that are coming out, but they are just recommendations that NOACA can consider, the Board of County Commissioners consider, the City Councils consider, the townships can consider, the things that we can do to do things better. Because if we look at the long-term development and what's going on in Northeast Ohio, the cost of government has been too high. We've got to do things to make sure that the next generation doesn't have that local cost. Yes, we can be concerned about the federal government and its huge costs, but local government too has issues that we need to deal with. Brunswick, sadly, is a bad example of where the prior generations, the money wasn't set aside for the replacement of the roads. Now they've got to put another issue back on the ballot again to repair their roads. And it's no federal grant or state grant that's going to take care of those subdivisions. But over the period of time, their money should have been set aside for the replacement of those roads. It takes about $1 million a mile to replace, and when you look at it, it's the people, the whole households that are going to have to replace that. So those are the kind of policies that we're going to say, in meeting with Jim Renacci and talking about this, he's absolutely, he concurs. He says, yeah, these are things that local governments and the people making decisions need to decide in your regular budget that you're setting aside the money that you can go and replace those roads. And ultimately, if you don't, you're eventually going to have to raise taxes. And it's obviously to the detriment of the community and the business community. So there's a number of these things coming up in public comment. And I know that there's the fear that these things are going to be imposed, and it's legitimate. But it's also what I found is, by and large, is people at the grassroots level, people looking and saying, okay, for the long term, we do have to be concerned about how our government operates. And when we're concerned, we take control of the government. So by and large, and NOACA is the fiscal agent for this grant, and right now we'll be going through a process of reviewing the recommendations, see if it makes sense. One of the big ones is to make sure we encourage investment in our existing communities. Our existing communities are like our cities and our townships and our villages. Yeah, we ought to make sure that we continue to invest in those communities, and we develop policies to do that, to make sure that our infrastructure, to make sure our connections, like the water, between Medina system and Medina County system. Those are things that we need to be involved with. So this is just, in my mind, good governance. I know there's that fear that this stuff's going to be imposed, but no, these are just recommendations. Now, with what the Obama administration does with this stuff, that's going to have to that has to be fought to the nail when it comes down to trying to impose these things. But we need to make sure that people have more options, and that's what the recommendations basically entail.
I think the two things that Steve mentioned as themes, one is as much local control and local say in what happens as possible, and two, just make sure we're making good fiscally responsible decisions, because at the end of the day, it's all taxpayer dollars. At the end of the day, it's all taxpayer dollars, unless it's casino money. Then it's gamblers' dollars.
Right. So I'm hearing that Agenda 21 is there. There are those who would like to central plan us, and the solution is to continue being involved and being aware and having our elected officials look out for us. I couldn't help but react about the high-density living. That would be Cleveland. And I just saw...
Well, not anymore.
Well, maybe not anymore. I just saw in the newspaper the other day that Cleveland, Lorraine, and Mentor was a metropolitan area that has lost 8,100 jobs per month for about the last 7 months, leading the nation each and every month in lost jobs. And I thought, whoa! I mean, that place is still a drain on jobs. That's it. Yeah, it's astonishing to me. Yes. Reelect Mayor Jackson, and he's supposed to be the conservative choice?
Yeah, that's a good point that's just brought up, is what concerns me is the term regionalism. And the feds want to go to like a regionalism type concept with metropolitan areas to suck dry the suburban, ex-urban counties to help subsidize their failed policies in our urban centers. So in other words, make one massive ghetto, including the ex-urban counties that surround our major cities. The Democrats have made those hellholes, let them stay in it. String barbed wire around it, close it off, put the claymores in the trees, and dare them to cross the boundary.
Don't sugarcoat it, Larry, give it to us straight. All right, I appreciate the time here, I appreciate the questions, and again, this is always an honor for me to speak to this group. It's not only do you share principles and values that I do, but you're also well informed. So, again, I thank you for the opportunity. And
I always appreciate Adam stepping in and enlightening us. Every time he speaks, I learn something more, or at least I'm reminded of something. In this case, I'm reminded of, gosh, it was about 20 years ago, I think. Lisa and I were down in Cobb County, and Newt Gingrich was trying to put an end to the welfare state with Bill Clinton. And we did a little research. We discovered at that time poverty was almost synonymous with single motherhood. And it was just astonishing. I mean, just as stark as could be. Single moms were paid more money for each additional kid, up to about 5, I think it was. And quite frankly, once they got close to that 5th kid, they would take a bath if they ever got a job. They would not make as much money on a job as they were getting from the government.